Welcome back, Conservancy kids. I'm here today with my good friend Taylor, and today we are talking about the San Pedro River. Hi Taylor, thanks for joining us.
Hi Nicole, thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about your background. You've been in the conservation field for the past 10 years?
Yeah, I have been really lucky. I started volunteering in high school. That led me to study wildlife biology in college, and I have been volunteering and then working in conservation in different aspects for all of that time now.
That's amazing. So right now we're in Sierra Vista, Arizona, and we are right next to part of the San Pedro River. So tell me a little bit more about the San Pedro River and why it's important.
Yeah, so the San Pedro River, as the name implies, is a body of water that's the lowest part of the watershed in the San Pedro Valley. And because the water kind of all meets into this location, it forms this flowing waterway. Here, the San Pedro River starts in Mexico, flows north through our valley and through a lot of farmland farther north, and eventually meets up with the Gila River.
That's awesome. So, Conservancy kids, we've talked a little bit about water in the desert. We did talk about watersheds and what those are, draining from the high points to the low points. And we know that in a desert, it's really hot, it's really dry. Water is super important for all life. And we're actually not in the Sonoran Desert right now. Taylor, what desert are we in?
Yeah, so one of the main deserts that you find in this area is the Chihuahuan Desert. The main part of the Chihuahuan Desert is farther southeast of us in Mexico, but it does come up into the U.S. just a little bit. It's mostly in New Mexico, but it also comes into this southeast section of Arizona.
That's awesome. So even though we're not in the Sonoran Desert, we still are facing the same conditions where it's really dry, we don't get a lot of rain, precipitation, and the sun is really hot, so a lot of water evaporates. So this is like a really important resource for all the wildlife here. So tell me a little bit more about how wildlife uses this to survive.
Yeah, so the first very obvious thing is that this is water on the surface that any animal can access and drink from. But then there are things you don't see. There's the critters that live in the water, obviously it's like fish. We have amphibians that live in this water. But we also have invertebrates, so bugs or insects live in this water. They swim around and they're a food source for a lot of things. But then the water, because it is also underground, feeds all this lush habitat around us, creates this amazing green plant life around us, and that supports not just, the plants, but then that feeds back into the cycle. So the water is absorbed by the cottonwood trees, and then those cottonwood trees are eaten by some insects and some mammals like a porcupine, and that water continues in that animal's body to feed throughout the cycle. So the water isn't just necessarily what you see flowing in the river, but it feeds through the whole system. Kind of like a food web, but think of it as a water web.
That's awesome. And I know that during different parts of the year, we talk a lot about migration patterns of different birds. So how does something like the San Pedro River play into these really long journeys that some animals are taking every year?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we're thinking about migration, during those long journeys, sure, you've got lots of resources at the beginning and at the end of those trips, but you might need, you're still going to need a lot of food, a lot of water on those trips. And especially down here in Arizona and the Southwest in general, there aren't a lot of waterways left for, say, birds that are traveling hundreds or thousands of miles to use as a resource on those trips. So something like the San Pedro, especially with the way it flows, north to south, it's right along where those birds want to be flying. And because of that, we've become a vital source for food and water for all those birds migrating between Mexico or South America and North America. Some of those animals are traveling all the way from Brazil to the US or Canada, and they do that twice a year.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. So obviously, as animals ourselves, we humans love water. It's hot in the desert, we like to cool off. So what are some tips for how people can enjoy these beautiful natural waterways and be respectful of the environment?
Yeah, no, great question. Of course, you could come down to locations like this and you can go swimming, get your feet wet, things like that. We also enjoy it just through the scenery. You come down to places like this, you see these incredible trees, you can see wildlife, so a lot of people do things like bird watching or hiking or horse riding. You can also enjoy it through, knowing by conserving water, you're helping protect habitat like this, and finding more places around you and where you're at, like the San Pedro River, that do the same things, such as at the Conservancy.
That's awesome. Yeah, so when you come here, you want to make sure that, A, you don't leave any trash. Make sure if you bring any food, if you want to have a picnic, that's awesome. But make sure anything you bring in, you take out with you. Also, I know sometimes it can be kind of gross to talk about, but sometimes we have to go to the bathroom out in the outdoors. So I think there's a rule of thumb for how far away you should go to the bathroom from flowing water.
Yeah, absolutely. This is really, really important. So it is recommended that you're at least 200 feet away from a water source if you use the bathroom, or you take 100 big steps away from the water. You start at the water's edge, just walk straight away. Once you're there, you can look for a nice spot, either right there or a little bit farther out.
Awesome. And make sure if you do use toilet paper, it's a little gross, but make sure you also pack that out, because what happens when it rains, we know that water likes to drain to the low points. And unfortunately, even though it doesn't seem like that much of a difference in elevation, where you go to the bathroom is going to be a high point. So if it rains, that toilet paper is going to make it into the river, and that's pretty gross. So thank you so much for joining us, Taylor. It was incredible to learn about the San Pedro River, part of the lifeblood of the desert, and how we can enjoy it while still respecting the nature around us. Thank you so much, Conservancy Kids. We'll see you next time.